Hello YouTube, welcome to today's video. I hope everyone's doing well out there. So today I'm going to talk about photographing the moon. So if you do like today's video, please do hit that like button. Also hit that subscribe button as well so you can see more content from me in the future. And hopefully that'll help grow the channel so I can keep making more videos in the future as well. So what you'll notice from this image of the moon is that I like to do a composite, and that way I can just give the photo a little bit more character with the shine around the moon, and also giving a little bit of definition to that unilluminated side of the moon. So when I actually take the images of the moon, what I tend to do is I sometimes use a big telephoto lens. I think you've seen that in another video. I've got a 600mm lens, and I will use that, and that gives me good results. But I also like to use a telescope sometimes as well. So when I use a telescope to take these photos, I really just use the telescope as a big lens. And what I tend to do is I'll have a digital camera, and I use a different, like a mount adapter, which is called a T adapter. And that just allows the camera to slot into the back of the telescope. And once it's in the telescope, you just use the camera as normal really, but one thing you don't have is you won't have any F values that show up because there's no aperture on this. So what you only see is your shutter speed and your ISO, and you just use them values to get the exposure right on the back of the camera. So the telescope I use is just a basic telescope really, and what it does is once I've got the camera in, I basically just point it to the moon, and it has a little sort of computer program on the side, and I tell that it's looking at the moon, tell it where I am in the country, and it just tracks the moon for me. But I do have to sort of alter it a bit every now and then. But what I tend to do is just try and keep the moon as central as possible and take my photos there. Because I'm only taking a couple of photos, what I'll do is I'll take one photo that just exposes the moon normally, and then I'll take a second photo, and I use that photo just to give me some definition on the side that's unilluminated, and also use that image as well then to put the shine on as well. So let's go to the telescope, and I'll show you how I take those photos on the telescope. Okay, so I've got my camera now attached to the telescope. So the first image I take is this, and you can see that my camera doesn't have an F value here because it is there's no lens attached to the camera, it's just working off the telescope. So I've got my ISO 100, and I take the image actually, I think it was an 80th of a second for this one. But you can do this on a telephoto lens, and all you need to do is have the settings right to expose for this side of the moon. So if I was doing this through a lens, I'd probably want quite a fast shutter speed because my probably wouldn't be tracking the moon. So you want the shutter speed as fast as possible, the moon sharp, and then you can take a good image and get a lot of detail in the moon. Now I quite like the moon like this when it's not fully illuminated, because you get more details of craters because there's like a side lighting on the moon and it's more interesting. So that's what I'll do for this shot. I'll just make sure this is exposed right and take the shot. So to do this side of the moon, I whack my ISO quite high. I think I'm on ISO 4000 for this, and I'll also slow down my shutter speed. Now because I'm tracking, I don't think that matters so much, but also I don't really need massively fine detail as well, because obviously I'm blowing the details on that side of the moon that is illuminated. But what I will get from this is you'll get like the shine around the moon, and you can add that to the image to give the effect that the moon is shining. And you'll also begin to see the outline of the side that's not illuminated. Now you won't see any detail in that at all because there's no light on it, but it then allows you to have this 3D effect or this HDR effect of the moon. So that's how I take the images. So the next step once the pictures are taken is to do the processing. So what you will have is a normal picture of the moon here for the illuminated side, a picture for the unilluminated part of the moon, which is here, and you'll also be able to use this with the shine here to combine them to give you an overall image of the moon, which would look something like this. Okay, so the first step is to just do a little bit of editing in Lightroom for me. So what I tend to do is there's actually very little that I tend to change on here, so I might change the temperature to how I want it. So maybe that's what I would go for. The other bit I would change is I'd come down to the detail tab, and what you'll see is when you zoom in, you do have a little bit of noise on the moon. So by using the sort of luminescence slider, you can get rid of that. So if I just take it up to the top, you'll be able to see that. I hope that will show up on the video. It's sometimes a bit difficult with the way that YouTube compresses these to see these details sometimes. But you can also add a bit of sharpening as well, just to make that a bit sharper. So that would be the image before, and if I go back without the sharpening, there's just a slight difference in there. Maybe if I zoom in so you can see the difference here. And I've done that quite a lot. I've put that up quite a lot just to make it easier to see for the video. Before I take this into Photoshop, I'll show you as well on here. So you can see here, you can see the noise a little bit more. So maybe if I come down to here, and you see, just by changing that luminescence slider, I can smooth that out, and it gives an overall sort of more pleasing sort of effect there. So once I've done the editing in that little basic bit of editing in here, I'll then take these over to Photoshop, which is where I do the blending, but also where I do final bits of editing, including doing the way I like to sharpen these or denoise them using Topaz. And I also like to add a bit of colour to the moon. So what I mean by that is, here's the image without any sort of colour enhancement, and here is the image with a little bit of colour added to the moon, which just brings out the actual minerals that are in the moon and just allows you to see them. And I quite like the effect of that, and as long as it's kept subtle and not done too much, I think it looks quite good. Okay, so I've opened this up in Photoshop now. So if you chose to sharpen this and reduce the noise in Lightroom, you would just go ahead with the next step. If you want to know how to use Topaz, so Topaz is a separate piece of software and you buy that separately. I particularly like the program they provide called Topaz Denoise AI, and that just works as a plugin within Photoshop. So you find that in the filter option once you've installed that bit of software. So you come down to Topaz Labs and then Topaz Denoise AI. Okay, so this is what you get in Topaz Denoise. When it opens up, it automatically applies a sort of level of noise reduction and a level of sharpening here. What you will see is on here that this is quite high, so if we was to look at the original and then release that so you can see the sharpened version, maybe let's have a look down at these craters. You probably see more of an effect there. So here's the original and here's the sharpened one from Topaz. You can see that it does actually apply quite a bit of sharpening, and obviously I would actually do this more subtly. If I was editing this myself, I just put the settings up high just so you can see the difference on the screen easier. So once what you'll do is, if you wanted to play with this, you would just play with these sliders until you get it to how you like it. Obviously that's disgusting, but once you get it somewhere to what you'd like, it's just a matter of clicking the apply, and it applies them settings and reopens the image back up in Photoshop. To add a bit of colour to this, what I would do is I work on a different layer. So I duplicate my bottom layer, and this is the layer I'd apply the edits to, and I just apply them until I've got something that I like. First thing I do is, if you come up to image and auto colour, you see that on this example this has gone like really quite white, quite bright, which is a bit too much. But this would be, obviously this is just a layer I'm playing my edits to, and when I do this myself again, it tends to be a bit more subtle because my sharpening and my denoise that I've done, I've not done quite as harshly as I would have done on here, but this just allows you to see that difference. So what I do to this layer is I'll come down to here and open up a hue and saturation edit, and I'll just increase the saturation a bit. Now if you put this all away, it's funky as hell and horrible, and quite often you'll see people when they've done this and they've got images like this, and it's just it's kind of too much. It's like the cosmic gods have just vomited all over the screen. What I do is I tend to just add a little bit of saturation And then just by pressing Ctrl C and Ctrl V, just keep adding layers until it goes too far, and then I'll just undo the final one. And what that does is it just adds a little bit of colour, and it's a little bit more subtle as well. I don't know why that works that way, but that just seems to be the way that it does it. So what I'd do is I would then flatten them once I've done it to get the image with just that little bit of colour on. So now you can see it's got that little bit of colour, but it is looking a bit funky, it's looking a bit bright. And again, I'll just make some further edits in the raw editor, just by maybe bringing the exposure down overall, bring the whites down, my highlights down, bit of contrast up. You see, you can begin to get it looking a little bit more how you wanted it in the first place. Just change the temperature, make it a bit warmer, and that's just how I tweak, and I just keep tweaking until I get it how I like. Sometimes I just take the vibrance down a little bit as well, maybe just take the saturation down a little bit. But the thing is, each image works differently, and you just got to play with these settings until you get something how you would like it to look. Okay, so that's how I add a bit of colour to the moon. But again, I'll just like to point out I have pushed this just a little bit just so you see it on the screen, because I find that if you tend to edit on here and record the screen and then upload it into YouTube, just in the way it seems to compress the videos, you do tend to get it can be quite hard to see the edits when they are a bit more subtler, which is how I like to be with the edits overall. Okay, so once you're happy with that, if you wanted to open that back up in Lightroom to make them adjustments rather than in the camera raw in here, if you just close it and press yes to save the changes, it will open up this image in Lightroom. So the next step, once you've got these how you like it, would be to open up these couple of layers in Photoshop. Now if you go to edit in Photoshop and you'd open up as layers, you'd then be able to go through the next steps to blend these together to give you the final image you want, which could be something like this. Okay, so for full transparency, this blending technique was done in a video by Alan Wallace, who is an incredible photographer. The astrophotography that he does is out of the top drawer, really. It really is great, and I don't think it'd be right for me just to reiterate the steps that he does in his video, because it would just be copying, and I don't think that's right. So if you want to know how to do the blending part, if you go to the link that I've put in the video above now, that will link you to Alan's video where he does this technique, and I'll also put a link in the description below. So this is the final image when it's all put together. I hope it's something that you like and you've liked today's video. If you have liked today's video, please do hit that subscribe button so you can see more content from me in the future. Hopefully I'll be doing a few more astrophotography videos once we actually get some clear skies here, which doesn't seem to happen that often, and we can get out again after lockdown. So thank you for watching if you've got this far through, and I hope you enjoyed today's content, and I'll see you again in the future.